Okay, let's get started here. I'm Robbie Diamond. I'm the president and CEO of Securing America's Future Energy and the Electrification Coalition. This is actually our inaugural. It's not working anymore. Here. This is our inaugural event in our new space, so welcome. We'll be webcasting this, and we look forward to joining the ranks of AEI, Brookings, Hudson, and all the others for viewership. But why don't I, before we start this panel, which I think is really a fascinating group of people, a lot of people come from different parts of the country, but really bringing different perspectives to the oil question and this, in particular, this NOPEC legislation, which more people are talking about at the moment. Let me introduce SAFE for people who don't know us. Securing America's Future Energy was started in 2004 to end oil dependence for economic and national security. We continue to see oil as the most important commodity in a global mobile economy, as our dependence on oil from a transportation perspective is at 94%. Every major recession in modern times has been preceded by an oil price spike, and many of our foreign policy entanglements, which we might hear about today, and constraints are driven by this need for one commodity to run our transportation system. And so we got together a group of four-star admirals and generals and CEOs of major companies that use a lot of energy to talk about this risk. And started a study called the Energy Security Leadership Council, which is co-chaired by Fred Smith, the founder of and president and chairman and CEO of FedEx, and certainly understands why a mobile economy requires oil, as well as General Jim Conway, the 34th Commandant of the Marine Corps. We're joined here by Admiral Blair, who's been one of our founding members, head of the Pacific Command, National Intelligence Director, wonderful advocate for our mission. And what we not only say that the problem is that oil is, we're completely dependent on one commodity for our transportation system, but that commodity is traded on an unfair and unfree market, OPEC. And so we've been advocating at SAFE for basically four solutions to solve this problem. One is to create a fairer and freer market so that American companies can compete fairly as well as others in the world, both on the demand side and how we use the commodity, but also on the supply side. Two is to produce as much oil as we can domestically with high environmental standards. We believe that energy dominance is a good thing, but at the same time, energy dominance requires more than just drilling. Energy dominance requires using that oil as efficiently as possible, which is why we've supported fuel economy standards, as well as diversifying our transportation fuels away from one fuel source. And so that is why we have supported other types of fuels, from electricity to hydrogen to natural gas and others. And recently we have become leading advocates on what we call CASE, which is Connected Autonomous Shared and Electric Mobility and Transportation. It's really just a remarkably exciting time for transportation, and the changes are fast and furious. I'll just say one thing about the oil market, and then maybe just turn over to the panel. And but I will be your co-host for today. Look, the oil market, after starting in 2004, reached its nadir at $147, driving the, as I said before, the U.S. economy and the world economy into recession. Some people believe it is the match that lit the fuse of the mortgage crisis, where people had to choose between paying a mortgage and filling up their cars. Not saying that wouldn't happen on its own, but it was certainly involved in that. At the same time, in 2014, as domestic production is rising, OPEC chooses to flood the market with not even that much oil, about 1 million barrels. Price drops dramatically. We have 160 companies that declare bankruptcy in the United States. Those are our drilling companies. 230,000 oil workers from beginning to the end of that crisis out of jobs, and Exxon and Chevron still underperform the market. The price now is $64.30. And one of these big problems with this commodity is basically, if you read the newspaper every day, it's what is OPEC going to do? What is OPEC going to do? What is Saudi Arabia going to do? What is Russia going to do? Now we've OPEC plus. And this is certainly something that concerns us because it detracts from the ability to both produce, as I said before, but also the innovation on the other side as car companies and others, businesses make investments based on what they think the oil price would be, but having absolutely no idea because they can't intuit what's in the mind of a bunch of people who meet in Vienna. So I think we care deeply. Certainly we're excited that President Trump himself, in his book Get Tough, Make America Great, has explicitly endorsed this idea and sees the United States as a bunch of fools to let a cartel continue to jerk us around. And so we certainly hope that NOPEC, after 19 years, will have some resonance. But certainly, I think our ability to talk about why this market is unfair and unfree is important in itself, because Americans should understand. So let me, with that, introduce our panel quickly, and then let's turn some questions, and then we'll turn over to the audience to questions. But first, I just want to introduce Admiral Blair. As I said before, Admiral Blair is a member of our Energy Security Leadership Council. He's been the Director of National Intelligence, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Command. He's currently the Chairman of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, USA. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, a Rhodes Scholar, and really one of the greatest, finest human beings I've ever had the privilege to work with. And really, that's been the joy of starting SAFE and working at SAFE, is meeting and working with people like Admiral Blair. Harry First is a Charles L. Denison Professor of Law at New York University, co-director of the Law School's Competition, Innovation, and Information Law Program. And from 1999 to 2001, he served as Chief of the Antitrust Bureau of the Office of the Attorney General of the fine state of New York. He's got a lot of other great, distinguished background, but certainly he knows a thing or two about antitrust. And Andy Morris, at the end over there, is a professor of law, dean of the School of Innovation, and vice president of entrepreneurship and economic development at Texas A&M. Professor Morris, he received his AV from Princeton, his JD MPA from the University of Texas at Austin, and his PhD in economics from MIT. He previously was dean of the Texas A&M School of Law, and we're grateful that you're here as an economist to tell us if this is still a cartel, because some people doubt that. Seth Bloom, to my left, is the president and founder of Bloom Strategies. He's former general counsel of the U.S. Senate Antitrust Subcommittee. He's been involved in looking at mergers such as AOL Time Warner, Comcast, NBC, and AT&T and T-Mobile. And he is his claim to fame, at least for us at SAFE, is that 19 years ago worked with Senator Cole to introduce NOPEC for the first time in 2000. And then we have Greg Ballard, Mayor Greg Ballard, who after a 23-year career as a U.S. Marine, he retired as lieutenant colonel and then returned home to Indianapolis, where he served 2 terms as the mayor of Indianapolis. And he's currently a visiting fellow for civic leadership and mayoral archives at the University of Indianapolis. He's also, I have to do this as a plug, the author of a new book that just came out called Less Oil or More Caskets, the National Security Argument for Moving Away from Oil. And so we thank you both for your service to the country, the fine people of Indianapolis, but also for grabbing onto this issue and seeing it for what it is. So with that, let me start with this panel, I think, and I'll just ask questions and we'll go from person to person. People can, of course, jump in as they see fit. So Seth, because you're on my immediate left, why don't we start with you? Why did you first draft NOPEC, and what is it about the global oil market that sort of spurred you and Senator Cole to jump on this as an issue?
Thank you for the invitation to speak today. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. So why did I first draft NOPEC? Well, you know, in the year 2000, I was a counsel on staff of Senator Kurt Cole, Democrat of Wisconsin, and he was at the time ranking member, senior Democrat, soon chairman of the Antitrust Subcommittee. And, you know, there was an oil price spike at that time. I can't remember what it was exactly. It may have been as high as $40 a barrel. And he had you know, and it was, there were OPEC oil production cutbacks, and he thought, like, why is this allowed? You know, there's the fundamental evil of antitrust is price fixing conspiracies. We can all argue about other antitrust issues. Is Google a monopoly? Should the Justice Department have brought the AT&T Time Warner merger challenge? Well, there's a lot of ambiguity in antitrust. But one thing that's not ambiguous is price fixing conspiracies amongst competitors are illegal, in fact criminally illegal. So why do we permit OPEC to go on and take no action against it? He asked the question. And I responded because there are protections for OPEC, at least as judged by the courts, under the sovereign immunity doctrine. And if OPEC was a collection of private companies, there's no question that it would be illegal under U.S. antitrust law. But when it's a collection of foreign nations, it has these protections of sovereign immunity and something called the Act of State doctrine. So we came up with the idea, let's just take away sovereign immunity protection of the Act of State doctrine and treat nations that participate in the OPEC oil cartel or any economic cartel as subject to U.S. antitrust law. So that's basically what it was about at the start. It seems to us to be a pretty simple idea. Going deeper into the weeds, there's actually already a commercial exception to sovereign immunity. And so what could be more commercial than selling oil for profit? However, a 1979 decision of a federal district court in California in the International Association of Machinists case ruled that OPEC was protected by sovereign immunity despite the commercial exemption. So we felt we had to basically legislatively overturn that. So that's basically the origin of it. By the way, I should say as an aside, one of the things I'm most proud about is the name. When you think about a bill in Congress, you have to think about what you're going to call it. And so I said, just didn't take me long. I said, well, let's call it the No Oil Producing and Exporting Cartel, or NOPEC. And this was my second year in working in the Senate, and I ended up there almost 14 years. I never was able to name a bill that easy, that successful. And I think, you know, it's stood the test of time 90 years later. Nobody was around. But anyway, so that's why. That's basically why you asked me a second question.
No, I think you answered bluntly.
Okay.
We'll get back to asking some of these questions. But I couldn't ask for a better setup. By the way, I didn't actually seek the people in this order, but somehow my thinking of questioning happened in this order. And if you want a job as an advertisement executive,
Thank you.
let us know. We can help. So, Harry, Professor first, opponents of NOPEC claim that the bill would, quote, eliminate the doctrine of sovereign immunity. And I just wanted to know your views on the precedent for Congress to make exemptions to sovereign immunity. And I should note that we are going to release a paper by Professor First later that looks at the entire bill of NOPEC, and we'll get to, this is some of it, but we'll get into more detail about it as we continue this conversation. So just your thoughts on that idea of eliminating the doctrine of sovereign immunity and how exceptional this is.
So, first of all, here's the old joke. Okay, now I'll just yell. Hi. So even before I get to that, Robbie, I want to thank Seth for naming the bill. If you want to know why RICO, you know the RICO law, why that's called RICO, just ask me afterwards. I can explain that one too. But I never knew this one. Just stepping back for a second, I come at this from the antitrust perspective, not as an oil person, and sort of looking across industries from the point of view of antitrust laws. I actually talked with Seth at one point many years ago when the bill was going through various iterations. The last thing I did, I think it was a decade ago, I wrote an op-ed about this bill and why it should be passed. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Robbie. The question about sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity is a court-recognized doctrine in the United States, and Congress in 1976 passed the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, which allows for sovereign immunity in civil cases under certain circumstances, but not others. So a major exception, as Seth pointed out, is for commercial activity. And that's been well recognized, is really not in dispute, I don't think, anywhere. And the basic idea is if governments want to be market actors, they should play by market actor rules. And the prime rule, certainly from my point of view, is they should comply with the antitrust laws. So the Justice Department has international guidelines that takes actually a very sort of strict view, or robust view is maybe the better word, for what constitutes commercial activity. I think one could argue that the district court decision on this point not appealed is probably not such good precedent. But the NOPEC bill says, okay, let's not argue about it, let's make this one of the exceptions. And from my point of view, certainly this is within the bounds of what Congress can do. And it's also good policy. And it's also very close to this. I should say that this bill, that the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act covers only civil cases. It leaves criminal cases, which is part of the Justice Department's jurisdiction, to general federal jurisdiction. So the bill is a very targeted response to what was a problem in some of the private cases that have been brought against OPEC.
So, let me try this one.
Oh, yes. Here, I'll pay.
Did want to try to fix this here. So let me go to Admiral Blair, and we'll get into just the whole issue of oil dependence itself. But I really wanted to ask you here that, look, a lot of opponents claim, as we continue to talk about this, that really the sky is going to start falling. That basically, I'll use a quote, international relations and diplomacy would cease, foreign travel would be dangerous for all government officials. And just your sense, are those fears, justified? And you've seen lots of different things. And maybe a second question there is maybe how would you compare this to other types of, threats voiced when the United States wants to, pass its own laws? And like JASTA was another one with, terrorism. There are a lot of threats. What's going to happen? We won't do business in the United States anymore. And just, what is the real world fallout when all these countries come and say, if you do this, you, United States, will not be able to function in the world?
No, I'm deeply encouraged by the opposition to NOPEC that we've seen coming from OPEC states themselves and from big oil companies in the United States. It makes me think that we're absolutely on the right track. But more seriously,
some of my colleagues here can make the antitrust arguments more elegantly than I can, but I'd be against a narrow legal interpretation if I didn't feel it wasn't good for the United States from an international economic and national security point of view. And I believe very much that this NOPEC bill would be good for American interests. It's really epitomized most in our relationship with Saudi Arabia. Although OPEC has a lot of members, we all know that Saudi Arabia, as the cheapest producer in the world of the largest amounts, is really the leader of that. And I still remember not too many years ago when the oil minister of Saudi Arabia said sort of thoughtfully, our challenge here in OPEC is to keep the oil price as high as it possibly can be so that we get more revenues, but low enough so that we kill off alternatives to our monopoly. Now, who was the last person who said that you could think of? John Rockefeller. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, right? We kill off all these little guys, we look at monopoly, and then we do at the price what we want to for our own purposes. And that would be sort of funny and humorous if it did not have such an enormous effect on the United States. Robbie talking about 90% of the transportation sector running on oil, and as we all know, in both our personal budgets and in our company budgets, our transportation expenses are relatively inflexible. If the price of oil goes up, we just pay it. We don't have alternatives. And so we are hostage to other countries' decisions based on their national interests, not on ours. And from my point of view, NOPEC gives us the United States government one more strong tool that it can use to fight its corner in this competition that we're in to do what's best for our country and not what's best for other countries. Now, if that weapon is used in a stupid way or crudely or without thought, sure, that can have bad effects. But I think that legislation is pretty carefully drawn, that it's the government that will use this tool, not private class action suits. It will be integrated with the other tools that we have for dealing with other sovereign nations, but it provides a very powerful set of negative incentives which we can deploy when we talk to the Saudi Arabias and the Russias and the other oil-producing countries of the world. Because what do we do right now? We schmooze them, right? Our president goes over to Saudi Arabia and says, oh, wouldn't it be nice if you get the price of oil low so that we could put the screws to Iran? Wouldn't it be nice if you kept the price of oil a little bit higher so that we could have shale oil drilling in the United States? And it's all sort of sucking up to a country which has entirely different values and objectives from ours. And NOPEC gives us one more tool which we can say, you know, yeah, we have a lot in common, but if you don't act in our common interest, here are some things that are going to hurt your country. So I completely dismiss all of the fear-mongering about, you know, arresting Aramco executives when they come to the United States. This is not what the United States would use NOPEC for. Were we to deploy it to provide some incentives for Saudi Arabia to act in our common interest, not just in Saudi Arabia's interest, against the interest of the United States. This would be part of a coordinated set of actions which would support the economic and the national security interests of our country. So I dismissed all the other stuff as hyperbole. As for big oil's opposition to NOPEC, let me think about this. OPEC tries to keep the price of oil as high as possible. NOPEC might interfere with that. Which side of that debate am I going to come down on? I mean, come on, you know. So let's think about American national interests. Let's think about where we need to go as a country, and I think NOPEC is a very strong step in that direction.
Thank you. So let me actually go to Andy as an economist. Now, my first question is going to sound kind of stupid, but I do have to say that OPEC has gone out there now and said, well, we don't need this legislation because we're not a cartel. And I sort of say, that's protest too much. Why do you care so much if you aren't a cartel? So are they a cartel? Maybe should oil be treated differently? And are you concerned about the volatility? Like many people say, like, oh, well, oil is different because it takes a long time to ramp up production and we need all this. Like, what's going to happen? I asked Admiral Blair from a political perspective, the sky is falling, but maybe from an economic perspective, how do you think about this?
Single commodity of this microphone gives an example.
Well, thank you for organizing the event. And I, as an employee of the state of Texas, have to give the disclaimer that I speak only in my personal capacity as appointing head intellectual and not as an administrator of the state of Texas. I do also want to say, if we need more oil and gas, Texas is happy to provide it. So oil is a commodity. There are lots of commodities. Everybody wants their commodity to be different. It's really no different than anything else. We don't need a supply management organization for oil. We have one. It's called a market, and we just need to use it. If OPEC went away, the price of oil would undoubtedly be lower because OPEC tries really hard to raise the price of oil, and I think its members pay for being members of a cartel because they're getting something out of it. If there's volatility in the oil market, there are financial mechanisms to deal with that. So we've seen Southwest Airlines pretty much eliminate volatility in fuel prices from their business plan by using a hedging strategy. So the market provides solutions to problems. So if volatility is a problem, there will be market solutions to it that don't involve international cartels.
Okay, sorry. Are we making any progress on fixing that mic? So let me, before I go to Mayor Ballard, let me just ask Carrie sort of that question. So in your paper, you talk about other commodities that we've gone after cartels: potash, lysine, vitamins, airline transportation, computer chips, auto parts. and maybe provide why you don't think oil should be different, and maybe how the United States has acted against some of these other, cartels in the past.
So that's a great lead-in for me, particularly. So first of all, cartel is a term that is used not in a legal sense, but also not in a positive sense. Nobody likes cartels, and for good reason, as I think the panelists have been pointing out. In terms of how the antitrust laws have been applied, unless Congress gives a specific exemption, antitrust laws apply to every industry. And the list that you provided includes manufactured, high-tech, telecommunications, and raw materials, so potash, lysine, recent cases. The interesting thing is the case that solidified the view in the United States that price-fixing agreements were not just illegal, but illegal in themselves, and that it was appropriate for criminal prosecution. The leading case was the United States against Subcommittee Vacuum Oil Company. It was a decision in 1940 by the Supreme Court, and it involved the oil cartel, except the oil cartel was not international at the time. And since then, all of our markets have become more international. But at that time, the oil industry thought they had an overproduction problem. They're coming out of depression. There was a lot of collusion. The Supreme Court said any agreement that fixes, raises, pegs, or stabilizes prices is illegal without more. And in fact, that interference or an attempt to manage this by government officials, which was going on, was not a defense. So the clearest statement of our legal rule comes exactly in this industry. From an antitrust point of view, no problem treating oil as oil has been treated.
So I've learned that the way to an author's heart is to keep holding up their book. So for your patience, Mayor Ballard, I'll keep holding up your book. So it'd be great to hear from you on why you became so passionate about this issue, and such a bold title as oil or more caskets. And then two is, what's your view? Like, we have a lot of domestic production in the United States. We also hear a lot of won't we drill our way out of it? And OPEC no longer matters, which I'll get to you, Andy, in a moment about that. But give us a sense of why you became so passionate, and then do you think we can drill our way out of it, or how do you see the solution and OPEC's role?
Yeah, those are great questions. I see this differently, not differently in a logical sense, but my emphasis is different on this. Because supporting this unfair market are our troops in the Middle East and around the world. We're protecting the oil supply routes and the infrastructure around the world. According to Safe's own data, that was $81 billion in 2017. And we've been doing this for 40 plus years. We've been, since the Brits moved out in the early 70s, and we moved in, we've been protecting the oil supply routes and infrastructure. As General Conway said in that interview process about 3 months ago, when that series of interviews came back, he says, why are we protecting the oil that goes from Iran to China? That's a really good question. But we've been doing that for a long time. And I would suggest to you that the reason we are in the Middle East, no matter what we're doing on any particular day, is to make sure that area is stable so that oil gets out of there. According to a Brown University study, in the last few decades, that's over $5 trillion and over 6,000 lives. That's why I'm concerned about this, all to protect this unfair market. We need to make oil less than a critical strategic commodity for the entire world. It needs to become just another industrial lubricant, not something that we need in our cars. We've been doing this so we can put gasoline in our cars and diesel in our trucks for a long time now. Finally, and I wouldn't have written the book otherwise, there's a solution, or solutions, around the corner. Not today, Not tomorrow, but I think within 10 years we can start to make a difference, and I think in 20 years I think we could solve this if we wanted to. Because if we don't, our children, our grandchildren are going to be over there protecting the flow of oil for the entire world, because that's what we do. That's part of our international security responsibilities. That's why I'm concerned about all this. Can we drill our way out of this? My answer is no. Absolutely not. Because we can drill, I'm sorry about this, we can drill all we want in Texas. But that will not alleviate the leverage that Russia and OPEC have over the entire world based on their oil reserves, which is well over 80% of the world's oil reserves. It will not stop the funding of terrorism that occurs because of the sale of oil. And it won't bring our troops home from the Middle East who are protecting the oil supply routes. It won't do any of that because 2/3 of the oil that comes out of the Middle East goes to Asia, and they're going to implement their oil, and we protect that oil. So those things will still occur no matter how much oil we produce out of Texas. I'm suggesting that we need to look at this from a national security perspective. Why are we still sending our troops over there when maybe there's an alternative in transportation that we can use?
So, just want to just keep that Andy go right there. Andy, so some people say that OPEC no longer matters. We're sort of drilled our way out of it. Like, what's your view on like how that relationship has changed? Has it totally changed, or from an economist perspective?
It's not that it totally changed. OPEC has periods when it's more effective and less effective, and maybe we're in a period when it's a little bit less effective now than it was a few years ago, but it still, as the mayor said, it still controls a large portion of oil supplies. It still has the sort of swing producers in the oil market. Saudi Arabia is the lowest cost producer, and so it's easiest to kind of raise and lower the production. So it's still having an influence, and certainly the members of OPEC think it has an impact. They're spending a lot of money to run this organization. If they didn't think they were getting something out of it, they wouldn't do that, right? These are not irrational people. So OPEC is certainly making a best effort that is not in the interest of the United States. And so subjecting it, as Professor first said, to the same rules as every other economic actor in the marketplace seems like common sense.
So, thanks. Seth, you just heard that we should subject